Today we are going to be traveling back in time to a long lost era when Andrea went to university. Yes, I just used third person. It's not actually been that long ago, let's be real, but it feels like a very long time ago. So much has happened since then, and I feel like I have changed. My perspective on even those university years has changed since then. So even just a few years feels like a very long time. Before I get started, I'm just going to very briefly sum up my university years so you have kind of an idea where I'm coming from, because a lot of you probably don't know a lot of the details. I have a bachelor's degree with 2 minors and a master's degree. So my bachelor's degree is in English, which is usually literature based, but it included some other like technical writing classes and business writing and stuff like that. But most of it was on literature. And then my 2 minors are creative writing and music. But that we're not really going to talk about in this video. It's not really applicable. Those degrees are from a kind of small mid-sized American university, and then I went to Bristol, UK to get a master's degree in English literature, specifically Romantic and Victorian literature. British, obviously. That was the reason why I wanted to study in the UK. So that's kind of my background. What I want to talk about specifically in this video are those undergraduate classes that I took for my creative writing minor, so my specialty in creative writing that I got when I was at my undergraduate degree. In addition to all the courses I had for my major, I had all of these very focused creative writing specific classes and workshops. A lot of people have asked me online, in real life, in random conversation, they've asked me about these degrees. I've not actually talked about them in a video, what I think of my degrees now. A few years later, I have a good job, I am happy in my work, I've really paved my path, but especially for English majors, I think a lot of us are very confused when we graduate, to be honest, because there's so many different things you can do with it, but there's no straightforward path, which is also why a lot of people think there's no work for English majors, because there isn't technically like a path. It's not really that straightforward. So it seems like there's no jobs, but actually there's quite a bit you can do with it. So I've not actually talked about what I have done with it. I've also not talked about what, from the creative writing side of things, I've done with those classes, because I still write. From my job perspective, I write content marketing and social media posts and social media marketing. So it's still writing, but it's very different from fiction writing. To answer an overarching question that a lot of you might be thinking right now, especially knowing that creative writing is not my job at the moment, do I regret getting a creative writing minor? Do I regret taking those classes? And I have to say no. I can't say that I've always thought no. I do think there was a time right after I graduated, and I'll talk about a little bit later why that was, but I do think there was a time when I thought it was kind of futile and I didn't know why I did it, and I wasn't sure it really benefited me and it would benefit me in the long term. But now that I've had a few years, and now that I have really dug into my craft as a writer on my own without, the guide of classes and professors, I can definitely say that I don't regret it at all. I learned some really great skills there, and I did a lot of growing through those classes that I could have done elsewhere, I could have done through other means, but for me personally, doing that through class and experiencing that just really helped me grow. We're gonna start off with a very general one, but it was very key for me because it was the first time I had really experienced this, and that is sharing and workshopping together with other writers. Growing up, a lot of my friends I met through orchestra, I met through music, and I didn't actually have a huge community of writers. It was before, Twitter and Instagram. I didn't know anybody else really who loved to write like I did. So going to university and taking classes with other people who also loved to write was really eye-opening for me, and then being able to write things and share them with people and workshop them and go through the actual workshop process. It was the first time I ever went through a workshopping process and a critiquing process. Being able to workshop these things with other writers on a very peer level and read their stuff as well, learn how to give my own critiques, learn how to give my own feedback, and also reading other people's work, unpolished work specifically, can really help you learn about mistakes, because everyone makes mistakes, but you don't necessarily notice your own mistakes in your writing, but then when you see someone else make a mistake, that often is more noticeable. So it definitely just increases your awareness, and it teaches you how to express yourself when you're speaking about writing, when you're speaking about what does work and what doesn't work, when you're giving advice, when you're just discussing something very, not necessarily a critique. This was the very first time I got that experience, and I mean, yes, you can have that experience so many other ways, and I have had that experience since university with other writers, but it was the first kind of eye-opening moment, and it was the perfect outlet for it because everybody was kind of accountable. It's a class, you have deadlines and things, so you have to work towards those, and everybody, has their workshop round, has their workshop day, so it was very regular and consistent. So I really got the experience of doing this on a regular basis. A really important thing that I learned from my creative writing classes was just general attention to my prose. I had read all about the different points of view. I had read all about the different tenses. I had read about, you know, don't use too many adverbs and don't use, you know, too fancy verbs and adjectives and things because it's less accessible, blah, blah, blah. I'd read all of that stuff, but where I really started paying attention to the nitpicky details of how I was conveying my story was when I was doing creative writing workshops. I was writing a lot of short stories. I was doing a lot of like textual analysis, really just grainy details of words and figuring out how I was expressing myself on the page. And I had never taken quite this detailed of an approach. I'd never looked that closely at how I was writing. I'm gonna give you one example, dialogue tags. This is something that I have heard since the creative writing class, so once again, this is not something you have to take your creative writing class to learn, but for me, this is where it really sank in, and it was the first time that I had heard this. First of all, that dialogue tags are often just not necessary at all, so it made me really start thinking about when is it necessary, when is it not, and not just kind of following my gut like I had been doing. Second of all, that fancy schmancy dialogue tags are often actually more distracting to the reader than just he said or she said. It's plain, it's simple, it's often invisible. Third, and maybe most vitally, if you're tempted to use a fancy schmancy dialogue tag, it might actually be because something is lacking in your actual dialogue. Your dialogue should be able to be read in the tone that you want. So sometimes saying like whispered, for example, can be helpful because it's not always obvious when someone might change to a whisper. But take, for example, she snapped or she interjected or something like that. It should be very obvious from how you write your dialogue that this is an interjection or that she's really mad and so she's gonna snap her words like that. It shouldn't be necessary to convey that through a dialogue tag. You should be able to read that as a reader in the words that you're writing on the page. So it made me think a lot more about my dialogue and a lot more about how I was conveying my characters' moods, not through description, not through telling the reader what they're thinking or what they're feeling or what their attitude is, but showing it through the words on the page. This is just one example of a ton of stuff that I learned in these creative writing classes about prose, about attention to detail, about line editing and all of that. Things that I was told by my professors that kind of just like, I had that wow moment, and then other things I kind of experimented with and grew to understand through my workshops, through my assignments and all of that. They really just were so valuable in making me take the time to focus and concentrate on craft and on the craft of writing. Kind of related to that, but one of the huge benefits for me personally in the creative writing classes that I took was kind of just an outlet to create and to try lots of different things, to write on a deadline, kind of this different approach to writing than what I had writing as a hobby, writing for myself. I wrote primarily short stories for my classes, but I also wrote like paragraph long stories. And, you know, we did exercises where everyone would write a line and pass it around the room and things that I just never did before creative writing classes. And I haven't actually really done specifically since. Didn't actually like it, not gonna lie. I really hated those kind of like 10 minutes, write something and then share it with everybody. I kind of hated that. I had a little bit of class anxiety with those types of things, but it was really good for me. I'm really glad I did it, and it helped me create, just constantly create. Of course, in addition to those in-class exercises, there were tons of stories to be written and to be turned in by deadlines, in the same way that you'd write an essay and turn it in for a deadline. And that was a very different skill as well for me, because normally I didn't write short stories, first of all. I liked longer projects. Writing on a deadline was something I had never done in my life. Definitely a challenge that will prepare you if you want to be published in the future like I do. Definitely a good preparation for that. It just really changed the way that I thought about writing. It made me more methodical, and it gave me a really great environment to just experiment and to grow, basically. All right, so this next one definitely has both a positive and a negative aspect to it, both of which have helped me grow as a writer, by the way. One thing that I also learned from my creative writing classes was that literary fiction and mainstream fiction do not always get along. More specifically, literary fiction writers and mainstream fiction writers. And when I say mainstream fiction, I also kind of just mean genre fiction, blanket statement, anything that has a genre. So what I like to write, fantasy, sci-fi, horror, all of that stuff, was very separate around the people that were in my program. And this is not every program, by the way. I can't speak for a lot of other programs. Some universities and some programs are much more open to genre fiction, but mine was not. And I would say that at least 85%, maybe 95% of the people around me were literary fiction writers. There were very few people in there who wanted to write genre fiction. There were very few people who even read genre fiction. So I was very, very lonely. And there definitely was this kind of, I hate to say it, but there was snobbishness. I mean, there were people there, not everybody, but there were definitely a lot of people in those classes who were very snobbish toward mainstream fiction. Having this distinction so clearly defined for me, living in this, experiencing this distinction, really actually did help me discover that I wanted to write genre fiction and I wanted to write mainstream fiction. What's unfortunate about this is that this dynamic really shouldn't exist. It doesn't have to. There's tons of people who enjoy both literary fiction and mainstream fiction. I have read my fair share of literary fiction, and of course mainstream being what I love the most and what I write, I've read a ton of. I enjoy both. There's a time and a place for both. There really shouldn't be this dynamic. So that is an unfortunate thing that I experienced through my creative writing degree. And I mentioned earlier that I would talk about why when I first graduated, I actually did kind of regret the degree a little bit. And it was because of this. So a lot of it was because of this, because I really just kind of felt like, why did I do that? Because I forced myself to write literary fiction. First of all, I did try a few genre short stories, but people didn't really react well to them. So I wrote mostly literary fiction. So I kind of felt like, you know, all the stuff that I produced for these classes, I'm not really necessarily going to want to publish most of it. It's not really what I want to do in the long term, so why did I do this? Since then, I have figured out through writing, through my own kind of personal growth as a writer, I have discovered that that did help me. All of that writing helped me. Trying the different things helped me. Trying literary fiction helped me. They may be separate styles and categories, but they do not live in their own completely separate worlds. There is definitely a lot you can learn from either one and apply to the other one, which is definitely what I've done, and that is why I do not regret it at all now looking back. Added on top of the fact, of course, that this is when I kind of realized what I wanted to write the most. The last thing on this list is very, very specific, but I swear, this has changed my life. In my creative writing classes, I got to experiment with different points of view like I never had before, because when writing long projects, you pick your point of view and you go with it and you don't change it a million times in the story. So I tried different things, I tried some different tenses, I tried some different points of view, and I learned through my own experiences, but also through a teacher who was my favorite. She was my favorite creative writing teacher that I had the entire time, all the classes I took, but she pointed out the fact that first person is very, very often misunderstood by beginning writers. A lot of people think first person is easier. This is something I've actually read online. I've heard people say it in videos and in talking with people. They say first person is easier because you're closer to your protagonist, and so it's easier to get in their head or to write them. Okay, so this could be true for some people. We all have our strengths and weaknesses. We all have our preferences. Maybe some people find it comes more naturally to write first person, but as a general rule, it's not true. Actually, first person is a lot more challenging. You are actually in the head of your protagonist. So you're limited in a way that not even third person limited is limited. And in some ways, it doesn't even necessarily get you closer to your protagonist, because the reader is still very much aware that they're not this protagonist. That's not how it works. I've read tons of first persons where I am completely different from that first person character. It doesn't actually bring you closer in that way. What it does is just bring your narrative further into the head of this person, which can be really interesting and a really, really valuable tool and a really fascinating read, but it just poses different challenges. So in a lot of ways, it's actually much harder to write first person than it is third person. And this is why I do not get the advice that I have read before and I have heard before of saying to start with first person when you first start writing, because it's the easy one to do. Not true, not true. They all have their own challenge. Basically, don't go into it and don't pick your person based on whether or not it's gonna be the easiest or get you closer to a character. Your writing is gonna do that. How you tell the story is gonna do that. But first person poses its challenges because you really should be conveying everything down to the pacing through that person's head. This applies to third person limited, but not quite to the extent of the first person view. Okay, I have been babbling for a very long time. I hope this has been interesting to you. Obviously, this is not comprehensive. I learned tons of other things in these classes, and also there were, negative things about these classes that I have touched on a little bit, but not really that much. I mean, there definitely were negative aspects of the classes that I haven't talked about here. I don't know if I will talk about them. If you're curious, please do let me know. If you have specific questions, I could even, include some in a Q&A or something. Let me know in the comments as well. What is your experience? Have you taken classes? Did you like them? Did they help you? Did you not like them? Reasons would be amazing as well. I would love to know why you did or didn't like your classes. And also, if there are specific things that you learned from creative writing classes, please let me know in the comments below, for me and for the other people reading the comment section, so we can just kind of get a like speed dating with writing advice. If you like this video and you want to see more writing related content, don't forget to subscribe to this channel and to turn notifications on so you can see every time I upload a new video. You can also follow me on Twitter and Instagram. I post a lot more regularly so you can see what I'm up to, what I'm writing right now. My cat, if that encourages any of you to follow me. I post a lot about my cat too. And of course, I will post there every time I post a new video. So just in case you're worried about not seeing it in your subscription box and not getting a notification, you can follow me there. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I will talk to you very soon in another video.